What's up, everybody? Ben Raz and Matt Kajeski here for Betting You. All things college football. We are ready. We are prepped. We're here to talk about the Big 12 today. We've been doing our conference previews each and every week. Next week, we flip it to week 0. We're going to be giving you our favorite plays from actual games. But in the meantime, we've got some of our favorite bets from the Big 12. Sir, how you feeling? And then I'm just going to get right to it. I say it every single show. How do you feel about the Big 12 in general? Do we have playoff teams to talk about, or do we just have a bunch of teams to talk about?
I'm doing great here.
Good.
And the Big 12 kind of view this like the Pac-12. Really exciting conference. Week to week, you see some of the most competitive games. That doesn't necessarily lend itself to playoff action when these teams cannibalize each other. A lot of times they're behind the Big 10, behind the SEC, behind Clemson in recent years, and they don't get a team in. But that doesn't mean any of the action week to week isn't right on par with some of those elite conferences. And this year, I think Texas is widely viewed as a contender in this conference. We'll see if they can actually make the jump. I don't know if Texas is back. We'll discuss it. But yeah, it's a really interesting conference. And then, of course, we have the realignment stuff to discuss here too.
Yeah, I told you before the show I was doing some prep, and I'm like, why am I looking at BYU? And then I remembered they're just in the conference. So we're going to get to all that and more. I will say, if you've been enjoying these previews or you're hopping in for the first time, welcome to Odd Shopper, all things betting, college football. This is where you want to be. If you're listening in podcast form, by the way, we've got this on podcast. Go check it out there. Get your exercise on. Listen to us ramble on about some teams. You can leave that review. All that helps us out. It's time to dive into it. I'm ready if you are, friend. Here we go. I'm going to bring up the board, and Texas is the first team, and we do this in order. 9.5 wins. Over is juiced a little bit, minus 140 range. You see it on the screen there. I know I just kind of asked you this, but this seems like maybe the most likely team to actually make a deep run in the national picture. Or do you see something else with Texas? Talk to me about the expectations with Ewers and everything they've got going on.
I think it's the most likely team to make a deep run too. And I think they finally have some recruits in place, some trench warfare pieces in place that they didn't necessarily have under Todd Herman. And it takes a few years to get a lot of these recruits, first of all, on campus. And then they need to develop a little bit too, where you can actually contend. So I think the pieces are here. We'll see if Sark can finally get it done. He's kind of fallen short at every step of the way with this program. But again, recruiting at an elite level, coaching staff returns, Ewers returns. The big knock on him at quarterback is his downfield passing. Teams will just dare him to throw the ball downfield. And last year, he wasn't able to take advantage of that. We'll see if something changes this year. He's going to have the receivers to do it. He has Xavier Worthy back, Jordan Whittington back. Isaiah Nayer comes back from injury after he suffered debilitating season-long injury in camp last year. So we didn't even get to see the Wyoming transfer. A.D. Mitchell comes in from Georgia. They have elite recruits everywhere in case someone gets hurt. Jatavian Sanders at tight end, all 5 of their offensive line. And that was a big concern from them last year, mainly because they were also young. But you get each of those high-profile recruits a year under their belt or more in some cases. That's going to be awesome for Texas on offense. Defense is still a little bit of a question for me. You lose an edge, 2 defensive tackles, a linebacker, and 2 defensive backs. We'll see if we can get Texas to replace those. Last year on defense, they were 9th in run D, 34th in pass rush, 62nd in coverage. So you certainly have some leaks on the back end that you need to take care of. But they bring in Jalen Catalon at safety, nickel, wherever they decide to play him. That's awesome. Gavin Holmes comes in from Wake Forest. A couple really high-profile recruits here in the secondary. I do think they'll be better. But the question always remains, once this Texas team stacks up against Alabama, LSU, Georgia, do they actually have enough talent to get it done? You're being paid off quite handsomely if they get there, like 22-1 for the Natty, plus 300 for the playoff is interesting. But ultimately, I still think this team is a step behind the elite teams in the conference. But I mean, with that said, we can dive into the schedule. 9.5 wins isn't that. It should be pretty attainable here for Texas, I think.
I mean, just looking at the schedule, a favorite in 11 games.
Yeah.
I mean, Oklahoma on a neutral field's always kind of a toss-up. You're at Bama. Even if you drop both of them, and I don't think that that's a given, at like TCU, at Baylor. I mean, those are tough games, but that's about as difficult as it gets outside. I think it's a very manageable schedule for Texas. Even in bad years, I think there's 10-2 equity. For the playoff, I guess the big question, we don't know the answer to this, is can they run the table, lose to Bama, and still make it? Because they would probably be boxed out by Alabama.
Yeah, you got to have one loss here. So you need to run the table hypothetically in this situation. And they're about a touchdown dog to Bama.
Yeah.
We'll see where that closes. I wouldn't anticipate that getting too crazy. Neither of these teams plays real opponents in week one. So and I don't think they show anything in week one either. So your real test is going to come in that week 2 game. But like you said, that they're going to prioritize SEC teams. They're going to prioritize Big Ten teams. We'll see if an ACC team can go undefeated, but they're going to prioritize the undefeated teams. And then there are tricky spots here. Like, I don't think Texas is going to be a monumental favorite in a lot of these games within the conference. I think there's slight favorites at Oklahoma. And then you're probably talking about like somewhere between 3 and 7 points against Kansas State, Texas Tech, TCU, Baylor, Kansas. Like, I don't think they're going to be overwhelming favorites in all those games. My preferred strategy would be a win total rather than like Texas to make the playoff or Texas Natty. But I guess one other thing you can say about this roster is their depth is better too. Instead of just Ewers at QB, now you have Arch Manning, really good depth. I think your running back is fine. You got a 5-star freshman in Cedric Baxter. He's probably not Bijan or Roshan right away, but that's solid. Receivers deep. Most of your positions are deep. You can actually afford an injury, whereas Texas in the past has just been absolutely demolished by some of those situations. With that said, I still think you're working at a disadvantage because of your conference, and then with very thin margins having Alabama in the non-con. So I'd rather go over 9.5 wins than anything else. Haven't taken it yet, but debating it.
I'm with you, and I definitely lean over as well, even at -140. I think this is a pretty good spot. And of some of the big name teams, this is one of my favorites. And the next team always goes hand in hand with Texas, and it's Oklahoma. Their big rival. The other top end team in this conference, plus 350 to win the conference, over 9.5 wins, but it is even money to the over. So they're not as high on this team in the market. You've got Gabriel at QB. Where is Oklahoma at this point, and how serious of a threat are they?
I think they're still a threat. I do believe they're a step behind Texas. I don't think it's quite as large as some people think. They have the same staff. Based on who's on that staff, I think you should be fine on defense with time and Venables. We'll see. Bad year last year. People seem to already ready. They're already ready to write him off. But I like Jeff Lebby as OC too. Gabriel's an awesome returning quarterback. Gets a lot of flack. I don't know why. The guy's done nothing but produce. This is like a top 3 efficiency signal caller in the country. I don't know if it's the team or how bad Oklahoma was without him. It really doesn't make sense to me. But he actually showed a little bit of running here too. And this year, finally, the team should actually be able to field a competent roster if Gabriel gets hurt. You're not just like throwing out. They should have run the triple options, what they should have done. They basically played 10 on 11 when Gabriel was out. But now you have Jackson Arnold behind him. You should be comfortable with that depth. Running back's fine. You got 2 former 4-stars, even though you lose Gray, like Barnes and Sawchuk, really high recruits. Receivers a question to me, losing Marvin Mims and Theo Weiss. They benched Theo Weiss, so that shouldn't even really matter. But Marvin Mims is a huge departure. Can Jaleel Farouk step up and take that role? We'll see. Drake Stoops certainly can't. He's a limited slot receiver. But then you add Angel Anthony, Brennan Thompson in the transfer portal. Like, you're going to be starting Texas castoffs. That immediately doesn't stand out to me. Go back in the portal, get Austin Stogner and his return after a brief stint at South Carolina. He'll play tight end. O-line is a massive question. You lost 4 contributors. 3 guys here have experience just because of injury, but your transfer additions are from Stanford, Miami, Ohio, and App State. Otherwise, you'll fall back on your depth, which Oklahoma recruits well. It's not the worst case scenario for them, but expecting a step back on the offensive line. Defense is a question. Their edge group was 107th last year. Can they take a step forward? You do add Rondell Bothroyd there. I'm not sure. Big losses are in the secondary where you lose 3 starters. They'll be pretty thin here. Their only starting corner returning is Woody Washington. And, they had an unexpected departure in the spring, so they didn't have as much time to address this in the portal. They didn't think they'd be losing a starter after the spring. They were 87th in coverage last year. I think you're probably relying on like freshmen or JUCOs, which not ideal, not the worst. They do recruit really well, and they have 5 players of at least 4 stars coming in this secondary. But I mean, man, we're relying a lot on really, really young players here, like Peyton Bowman and stuff. We'll see, but I don't think this defense is quite on par with Texas. All that said, I mean, like they play a way easier schedule than Texas. So we talked about Texas, even just within the conference, they're playing 6 of the top 8 teams. They're one of them. So, you can't play all 8. Oklahoma only plays 4 of them. They dodge Texas Tech, Kansas State, and Baylor. Really easy run within the conference. And they only get one of those as a true road game, Texas at the neutral location, of course. The only one of the top 8 teams they play on the road in conference is Kansas. Non-conference, they're going to be sizable favorites in every single game. Toughest test is SMU. This team is probably a pretty decent favorite, like approaching 7 points in 11 games this year, with the exception of Texas. So even with the head-to-head here, I mean, man, like they could climb over this win total at plus money pretty easily, even with a head-to-head loss.
It is kind of crazy because I agree that I'm not super high on this roster, but there's just not that much out there to really get them. You mentioned SMU, which is their toughest non-con game. They get it in Norman. They almost are unbeatable there. I don't think that's a serious threat. You're going to be, most likely 3-0. And then, I mean, I don't see it. Like Oklahoma State, I don't think it's going to be any good. You're at Cincinnati. I don't think that that's going to be a big problem at all. Cincinnati's pretty bad. I could see Oklahoma. I'll tell you this much. If Oklahoma happens to get into the playoff, whoever they play, I'll be shorting because I'm not going to be a big believer in this team no matter what. But I do think there's a path. My last question before we move on, and I rarely do this. Could you make a case for betting the over 9.5 on both Texas and Oklahoma?
Yeah, I think you can. Generally, I don't like that strategy, as you well know. It's hard for them both to eclipse their win total when you have a head-to-head game, which is going to result in a loss for somebody. But this is similar to Wisconsin and Iowa, just who is going to beat Oklahoma on the schedule. I think you have 4 potential losses, Texas being the main one, but TCU, UCF, and Kansas, we'll get into all of them. Do they drop all 4 of those? That'd be very, very difficult for me to see. And you mentioned some of the other teams, like dodging Texas Tech, Kansas State, and Baylor's huge.
Oh, massive. And you're going to see it right now as we move on to Kansas State, who really is kind of the third team in this conference. And they're already a significant drop off. It's an 8.5 win total, really juiced to the under, 5-1 to win the Big 12, and me, not realistic national championship-esque competitors for them. This is just a solid team. Talking to me about Kansas State, who, again, they always show up. They're always ready to go. But it looks like the books are saying, 8-4 is probably where they land.
This is an interesting team. I think it's a tough build for them this year, roster-wise. You're really experienced on offense. We'll dive into every single player. And the main concern for me is defense. Lose a ton there. And then if your defense takes a decent step back, you're allowing more points. Philosophy-wise, you don't play the offense that really lends itself to these shootout games. Like you purposefully are ground and pound, take the air out of the ball, limit other teams' possessions, and that works to their favor. But when your defense is awful, which I don't think they'll be awful, but they're definitely going to take a step back, does that result in closer games, more coin flip games? And I personally think so. But diving into the personnel a little bit, Will Howard returns, got a lot of experience over the last 2 years due to injuries in front of him. To replace Deuce Vaughn, you go to the portal and add Trayshawn Ward. He's awesome, Florida State transfer. DJ Giddens also played really well in a change of pace role last year, so I think you're pretty good at running back. Receiver's a huge issue. You have Malik Knowles and Cade Warner departing. You basically just go to Iowa's Keegan Johnson to replace those guys. Phillip Brooks is still there, but big need at receiver. Ben Sano is back at tight end. He's solid. Offensive line returns all 5 starters. That's awesome. Their offense is going to be fine, I think. They're going to run with Ward and Giddens, and they'll use Howard a little bit in that. And I don't think they'll really need those receivers quite as much. But defense, man, 4 DBs gone, 1 edge, 1 defensive tackle. It actually doesn't sound that much, but I mean, your 1 edge was Felix Anudike Uzoma. That was on a pass rush that actually wasn't very good. They were 85th in pass rush with a first-round draft pick. Now what happens when you lose him? You don't recruit well enough to really replace those guys. You lose Julius Brents at corner. This guy was extremely unique in the length and athleticism he provided. And now you're really just turning to two corners that have 300 plus snaps and then transfers from really low levels. Like Tyler Nalome comes from Southeast Missouri State. You've got Will Lee, JUCO, projected to start. Marquise Siegel at safety from North Dakota State. These players are all coming from really, really low level of competition. And this coverage unit was the strength of their defense, 52nd in the country last year. I do think they take a step back here, and teams like Texas and Oklahoma should have no problem throwing over the top of them. Fortunately, they don't play Oklahoma, so that would have to be like a postseason game or something. But Texas, think, has no issues. Texas Tech's going to run the air raid against them. TCU is going to have some of those components with Bryles. Kansas with Daniels is certainly going to take advantage of you. A lot of close games, a lot of coin flip games here on the schedule, which is why I can't bet this either direction. But yeah, I think Kansas State probably takes a step back this year.
I agree. Not my favorite bet. If I did bet it, it would be the under. It's mostly because I'll just point out their non-con. Southeast Missouri State's a win. Troy at home should be a win, but Troy's pretty good. At Missouri, I think is going to be a loss. I like Missouri a lot this year. I think that they could expose this defense right off the bat. And if you go 2-1 right there, now you got extreme pressure against, you're going to have to find some wins in the thick of this schedule. And I really don't see it. I don't think they're going to be terrible, but I think 7-5, 8-4 is ultimately where this team lands. And to me, 1-2 in this conference is pretty set. I don't think it's a given that Kansas State is the third best team in the Big 12.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Your toughest games, too, you look at the top of the conference, at Texas Tech. Then you play some of the mid-range at home in TCU and Baylor. I mean, drawing those top two teams on the road going to be very tough here for Kansas State.
Going to be tough. We've talked about 3 teams. This conference is gigantic. We got a bunch more teams to go. I do want to tell you guys right off the bat, though, if you're getting ready for week 0, even if you're looking at these win totals, shop these lines. And the best way to do that is to have access to multiple books. I'm going to put it on the screen right now. You guys know some of these things, but if you're new to this channel and you haven't taken advantage, all the deals are in the links in the description of this podcast, of this video, wherever you're watching or listening. 2 free months of OddsShopper Discord in addition to up to $1,000 in bet credits at BetMGM. Take a minute and sign up at BetMGM. You'll be happy you have it for the season. It's a no-lose situation in the sense that you just have access to another book. It's a great opportunity, and one with college football where these lines can really differ. So I want to make that clear to everyone. It is a really big opportunity to get set before the season gets started because we got a lot more teams to get to. And the next team is the team that I think is going to be the third best team in this conference, and that is Texas Tech. You mentioned their air raid and what they have and their abilities. This is a team that has a 7.5 win total. It's slightly juiced to the under. What do we see from them? Again, they've got some real weapons, but how do you think this team comes out in 2023?
Yeah, generally, like teams, a year removed from the installation of drastic offensive changes. And it wasn't drastic, but I mean, Kitley's air raid is pretty unique.
Yes.
Takes a little bit of time to assimilate here. You have continuity across your quarterback room because so many injuries occurred. That is a question for me is, can Tyler Shugg actually stay healthy in this offense? I don't know. We'll see. He's actually pretty talented when he does play. Good mobility for him too. But even if that doesn't work out, their former 4-star freshman, Baron Morton, he showed just elite potential. And man, the guy's a complete gamer. Got hurt almost immediately when he played, was like hobbling around, barely able to stay out on the field, but playing really well when he did so. So I love their quarterback situation. Running back, I think, is fine. You lose Roderick Thompson, but they run a rotation, so you're not really looking at anybody too different here. Good experience at running back. Receiver returns a ton. That should help with this air raid. Jaron Bradley, Xavier White, Miles Price. They had Dre McCray from Austin Peay. He's a good receiver, was really good at the FCS level. Tight end, both guys back, Tharp and Cup. You only lose one player on the offensive line, and because of injuries, you have 6 guys here with returning experience. Plus, you go out and you grab a center, Rusty Stotts from Western Kentucky, experience with Kitley. You love that. The team was 77th in pass blocking last year. That should drastically improve. Defense, you lose 1 edge, 2 linebackers, 2 safeties. Your biggest loss here is Tyree Wilson off the edge. Can you find a way to replace him? Because this team was 51st in pass rush last year, and that largely came as a result of what Wilson was able to do off the edge. So I think they'll be a little worse there. They don't really have clear replacements. They run this like weird defense where they rotate players a lot. So sometimes you'll see like Miles Cole on the edge. He's more of like a defensive tackle. He weighs 285 pounds. Or they'll like kick down linebackers like Steve Linton will play on the edge a lot. He's only 219. I don't know. It's just a weird defense overall. But at defensive back, I think you're going to be pretty strong here. CJ Baskerville comes in from San Diego State. You've got a couple 4-star freshmen here, which Texas Tech doesn't generally have. So at 113th in coverage last year, I think that is something that does improve here. But ultimately, if I'm poking holes in this team, I think defense is still the biggest concern with the players they lost. So it's going to be tricky. I think this is a shootout team. When they go up against teams like Texas, can they stop them enough to, score on par with them is the question. And that game will be on the road. Really the biggest question for me with Texas Tech. I don't love the price at this point. To your point, this has kind of been like the darling sleeper of the Big 12 across the industry. So they've been bet like crazy and bet down to a price where I'm probably not going to take them on any sort of win total or future to win the conference.
Yeah, the line is certainly not a ton of meat left on that bone, and I get it. I might just look to them week to week. We'll see. Even their first game, it's not a gimme against Wyoming. That's a weird road game. I want to see what that line is against Oregon at home. That's a real test. They're obviously going to be dogs, but I think that's a winnable game. And those are the type of games, you make a statement, can change the whole trajectory of the season. It's just a tough schedule. There's a lot of road games in there at Kansas, at Texas, at Baylor. I think this is a quality team, but as you mentioned, it's all about the price. Plus 110 for our troubles there to claw to 8. It's not the most ideal situation. I'm not looking to lock up my money for them. Last year, this show, because of you, I don't care, may not be true, I'm saying it anyway. We were the first people to mention TCU as a sleeper team last year. I never in a million years envisioned they'd make it that far. But you were all over them as a team that had a ton with that personnel, and now they're back. Obviously, they're not sneaking up on anyone. The forecast is not great. 7.5 wins, juice to the over. Bryles is there. Dugan is not. What is left for a team whose expectations obviously are not going to be able to be, eclipsed of what they did last year?
Weird team built largely through the portal, but love Dykes. This team is 21st in recruiting, 21st in the transfer portal. So they're trying to bandage over some of their departures, which I think they'll have some success doing. But as you know, anytime you're reliant on transfer portals, it creates a lot of volatility for your team. So I think teams are viewing TCU as a team that will take a large step back. I do think the portal additions make that volatile. Like maybe they do, and maybe they don't even make a bowl or something. But I think there's a chance they're actually still pretty good. You have Chandler Morris at QB. The previous OC started him over Max Duggan. So, I mean, you're dealing with pretty good talent here. We'll see if he can live up to Max Duggan's ability. You lose Kendry Miller and Amari DiMercato. That running back room is really deep. You had Amani Bailey last year. Trent Battle and Corey Renner still there. You add Trey Sanders from Alabama, and you get a 4-star freshman coming in. Receiver is going to be the hardest to replace, where Quentin Johnson, first-round draft pick. Darius Davis had elite speed. He provides something unique to your offense. Tay Barber's gone too. You do have Savion Williams there. He was a clear starter for this team. JoJo Earl comes in from Bama. John Paul Richardson from Oklahoma State. Jack Beck from LSU. Jalen Robinson from Ole Miss and UCF. Dylan Wright from Minnesota. You have a top 100 freshman in Cordell Russell. That's a lot of really talented players coming in. So maybe you don't have that one elite player like Quentin Johnston, but I think you have a bunch of very talented players that can play specific roles for this offense, which should be fine. Offensive line, you lose 3 starters. They're all from the interior, but you do return one guy there that did get 400 snaps because of injury. So really you got about 3 guys with pretty good experience here. Good transfers. Willis Patrick from Jackson State. Tommy Brockermeyer from Bama. Didn't play a lot, but really high recruit. Colton Deary from Maryland. Plus Ezra Dotson, Oyatad from Arizona State came over last year. You have a lot of bodies who've played or have really good recruiting pedigrees on this offensive line. I think they'll take a slight step back, but not as much as maybe people think here. On defense, you actually return a lot here. Your only real big loss, I think, is Hodges Tomlinson at corner. He's the only DB you lost. You lose 2 edges and 1 linebacker here, but I mean, TCU's defensive line was not the strength of their team. They were 123rd in pass rush. So losing those 2 edges, is that really a big factor here? You had Rick DeBreu from East Carolina to help that unit. Defensive tackle should be strong. Linebackers very strong. You have three starters back. You have 2 good corners coming back. Safeties both return. You have depth there as well. Secondary, I think, is going to be a little better than 50th in coverage. If they can shore up this defensive line even a little bit and get some pressure, this is a unit that could be pretty strong on defense. It might actually be the strength of their team, whereas last year was the offense. I haven't bet this yet, but I'm flirting with an over. I honestly might just take TCU week to week, though. Their schedule it's weird. You know, you got like a tricky game against Colorado, a team that I think a lot of people are going to bet early in the year. I think TCU, they're a heavy favorite, but that might be worthwhile in Deion's first game. From there, you've got Texas, Oklahoma, K-State, Texas Tech, Baylor. Pretty tough schedule. The only 2 teams out of the top 8 they dodge are Kansas and UCF, and those teams rank 7th and 8th. So there's a chance that you could play TCU as a dog, especially on the road in some tricky games here. Like Kansas State, we're kind of down on. That might be a game to play them. So I'm kind of just looking at the schedule and eyeing up places where I might play TCU again. But I don't think this is a team I'll be quite as aggressive on as I was last year.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's also a real weird schedule. It's really backloaded for them. Like there's a chance they have 6 or 7 and then they don't get to 8. Like, you know, they finish with Kansas State on the road, Texas Tech on the road, Texas, Baylor, and at Oklahoma. That is brutal. Like those are maybe their 5 toughest games to remain. So you're gonna have probably 6-1 to really get there, and I think they can do it. I'm just not in love with the situation. I think it's a better week to week team, as you just kind of pointed out. And it's funny, I feel the same way about Baylor, who's just not going to be a bet for me. We can still go over the team and talk about them. They're 18-1 to win the Big 12, a 7-win total that's about even money on both sides. Coin flip -120 and +100 on the other side. This is just kind of a team on everyone's schedule. But do you have any actionable takes for Baylor themselves?
Yeah, I think people are viewing them as pretty good, like a tricky Big 12 test, a team you definitely can't overlook that can clip you, but they certainly have concerns. They have a new DC coming in. I don't know. I think previous DC was kind of just the sacrificial lamb when Dave Aranda didn't have his shit together last year. Quarterback is a mess. Blake Shapen, he actually did show a little bit towards the end of the year, so I need to give him maybe a little more credit, but I don't think he's like a difference maker in this contest. He's not Dylan Gabriel. He's not Quinn Ewers. I don't think he's even like Jalen Daniels, but he's a returning starter. You had Sawyer Robertson to compete if he can't get it done. Running back is fine. Quaylon Jones, I think he's suspended from the team or kicked off the team, so now you don't have as much depth. Richard Reese is solid, good freshman there, though. Dominic Richardson comes in from Oklahoma State. You'd think that's fine. Receiver, I think, is okay. Monterey Baldwin's a difference maker, but I don't know how much like Josh Cameron, Hal Presley, and Arkansas transfer Ketron Jackson really matter here. I'd rather see their 4-star from last year at Armani Winfield play over, like a career underachiever in Ketron Jackson, but we'll see if they decide to do that. Baylor makes weird player personnel decisions. Lose your tight end, but you do have Drake Dabney and Kelsey Johnson back. Big question here is the offensive line. You return just 1 starter. You portal in the Barrington Bros from BYU. We'll see if they can make the jump here. Other than that, you do have some decent recruits, but you have no clear players to take over those other 2 starting positions. This team was 13th on the offensive line last year. I'm looking at a severe step back. And for a team that wants to run the ball, this could be a big issue for them. Defense also loses a ton. You lost 6 contributors in your secondary, most of them portaled. 1 linebacker, and 1 defensive tackle. And your defensive tackle was Ika, that big monster that got drafted. He's a huge loss for this team. He essentially held down your run defense numbers by himself. Your edge group does have 2 starters returning. That's fine. Love the edge group, actually. But, man, defensive tackle is going to be a big void to fill there. I think that hurts your run defense. Linebacker, you're going to rely on transfers like Mike Smith from Liberty. And then the secondary, and like, my goodness, their top player only has 240 snaps. Transfers across the board here. This unit was 33rd in the country last year in coverage. I don't think they're anywhere close to that unless, like some of these transfers actually gel, but I'd be betting against that. And that's tough in this conference when you've got Texas Tech, Oklahoma, Texas. They're all going to throw the ball on you. Now, they don't play everyone. They actually have a really easy schedule. When you look at some of those opponents, they dodge Oklahoma and Texas Tech. So that's favorable here. But Texas is there. Kansas State's there. TCU's there. Central Florida. If they had a little more talent on defense in the offensive line, I'd probably be looking at an over because the schedule is really easy. But man, this is like Kansas State to me. I think this team continues to struggle a little bit against the other top end talent in the conference.
I agree. They got Utah and non-con as well. I'm just not overly high. And some of these teams are going to gel nicely with transfers. Others are not. I don't know the answers to that. When I look at the makeup of Baylor, I don't think they have a clear identity. Don't like backing teams like that, certainly to tie up my money. Maybe I back them week to week, but at flat 7, not something I want to deal with. But I will say the next team up, Kansas, another darling who made real strides. They're building something there. Obviously, that staff has done a phenomenal job. A win total of 6 with a slight juice to the over speaks to how far they've come. I mean, they used to be dead last in these previews every year with like a 1.5 win total. Now they're a serious threat. 35-1 to win the Big 12 is probably a stretch, but do you expect this team to go bowling and have another successful season?
Yeah, I do think they go bowling. Love their head coach. Love their coordinators. They return everybody. It's a head coach that's had success everywhere he's gone. And not only did he turn around Kansas, he turned them around fast.
Yes.
The incredible job he's done with this program, which, I mean, they had a little stretch where they were successful in like the late 2009 era, but man, they've been horrific since. They have 2 quarterbacks you can trust. Jalen Daniels, awesome QB, really mobile. And then Jason Bean, former North Texas kid, he actually played well in relief when Daniels got hurt. Running back room, loaded. Devin Neal, Highshaw, they're all back. Dylan McDuffie comes in as a transfer. Your 3 top receivers are back. Your 2 top tight ends, 4 starters on the offensive line, and they have a lot of options here, like really high-profile transfers. Dre Doran from Buffalo comes over. Obviously, he has continuity with this staff. Logan Brown, former 5-star from Wisconsin. Spencer Lovell from Cal, Kobe Baines from Louisville. All these guys have some blend of experience or high-profile recruiting, and they only need to fill 1 offensive line spot. This team should be humming on offense yet again. Question is defense. Can they make even a slight jump? Because, man, Kansas on defense, they leave a lot to be desired in a lot of regards. I will say they return a lot of guys. So when you look at their defense last year, 104th in run D, 88th in pass rush, 92nd in coverage. Can that improve just slightly? I don't need you to be Alabama on defense, but can we get to the top 100 or higher, the top 75 in a lot of these stats? Defensive line, that's going to be the biggest question here. They lose 2 on their edge group. Their edge has 2 rotational guys from last year with 340 plus snaps, but you're looking at a ton of transfers here. Linebacker, I think, is fine. 2 starters back. They weren't exactly difference makers, so we'll see. DB returns every starter. Again, they were 92nd in coverage, so how much can they actually improve? They do have Demarius McGee from LSU, which is a good get for them. But overall, I'm going to bet on just year-over-year improvement, and even if they can get to 75, that should be helpful here. Their schedule is workable. Hardest team in non-con, Illinois. And then within the Big 12, you play Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and UCF. So you're dodging 2 of the top 7 teams, excluding yourself. So they don't play Baylor or TCU. I'm seeing 6 games, you're clear favorites in here. And then you're telling me we need to knock off one of Illinois, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and UCF. I'll take that. Plus 5 of those games are at home. The only one on the road is Texas. I love the over here. Minus 125, I think, is completely fine for Kansas. And I actually like their depth too. So no longer are you worried about Daniel's one-and-done injury. Bean is more than capable of orchestrating this offense if there is an injury.
Yeah, you mentioned the schedule works out. I'm interested to see that line in the Illinois game in week 2 for them. They're at home there. I think there's a chance that they're favorite. But again, very manageable. You got push equity with 6. I'll be right with you on the over 6 for Kansas. I think they keep improving here. Seeing what's what. Now we get to the fun part. One of the first teams, or the first team, I believe, that we've gone through that I'm just like, nope, didn't know they were in the Big 12, and it's UCF. They're here. Obviously, they had their run as well of some really big years, and now they take a step up. It's supposed to be okay, 6.5 wins, and it is really juiced to the over. There's no doubt about it. Dangerous team, no doubt. I bet on them a lot last year with your boy, Mr. Plumlee, running all over the place. What do we expect from UCF, and how do you think they acclimate to the Big 12?
I like UCF. They're my favorite of the new additions. If you're playing a long shot in this conference to win, this is the team I would bet at 35-1. Again, I don't think this happens, but we're talking long shot, fun money. Sprinkle it if you'd like to. Tell you why. You do have some new OCs here. I don't think that makes a huge difference. I actually like some of their additions. And Addison Williams, their DC, he already coached on this staff. I think that's going to be completely fine. You have a ton of players returning here and elite players. John Rice Plumlee, he's back at QB. They need to keep him healthy. They absolutely need to. But he's a difference maker at the position, elite mobility, and took a step forward throwing the ball too, which I think is positive. At running back, you lose Bowser. I think that's a positive. He's just a guy, and Johnny Richardson and RJ Harvey were really good behind him. So hopefully now their coaching staff can get those guys in the field. You do at depth, DeMarcus Bowman from Florida comes over, Cam Ingram from Bethune-Cookman. Wide receiver is going to be strong still, even with the departure of Ryan O'Keefe. Javon Baker and Kobe Hudson were elite last year. These are two transfers from high-profile programs. Baker from Bama, Hudson from Auburn. It's no surprise that these guys immediately came into the offense and started producing. To fill that void of O'Keefe, you add Corey Gamage from Marshall, elite G5 producer. Trent Whitmore comes down from Florida. He's been productive when he hasn't been injured. That's been the biggest thing with him. And then you return your top two tight ends. I think one concern people might have on paper is the offensive line. You only return two starters here, but on the roster, you still have Ed Collins. He's a previous starter who lost his job. You at least like that continuity. They have a lot of really good transfers coming in. Amari Knight from Bama. You have Bula Schmidt on the interior from Fresno State. Marcellus Marshall from Kent State. He's a starter. Drake Metcalf was one of the better linemen on that Stanford offensive line. I don't think this team finishes third in the country again, which is where they were last year, but I do not believe the drop-off is going to be as sharp as other people think. Then on defense, I do think this is going to be a strength. You lose 4 DBs, but man, your entire front seven is basically intact. The only guy you lose there is Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste, but starters across the front seven and elite ones at that. I think you're looking at a very good run defense and a very good pass rush. So can you bandage over your losses in the secondary? Got a couple good guys here at corner. DeCorian Patterson from Middle Tennessee State, multi-year starter. Fred Davis from Clemson, good recruit. And Jamaric Morris has been getting a lot of hype out of the JUCO ranks. We'll see if he can assimilate. But at safety, even though you lose some guys here, you have two guys that played over 300 snaps in Quadric Bullard and Jarvis Ware. You bring in Jarrell Wilson from East Carolina. These are players with experience here. And, you know, even when we have 4 departures in the secondary, that team was 76th in coverage last year. It was the weakness of your defense. I do think you're probably a little better here, even though you're replacing quite a few bodies. So I like this team. Non-con, I think, is fine. I think you're clear favorites in every game. Trickiest game is going to be at Boise. They're a good team, but I do think UCF is better. Within the Big 12, you dodge Texas and TCU. That's pretty good. Hardest game is going to be at Oklahoma, Texas Tech, Kansas State. Don't love that they're all on the road, but dodging the best team, and then TCU ranks 4th or 5th, depending on your book. Those are pretty solid. As a long shot, I don't hate this team.
Yeah, it's a team that certainly, if you're gonna get out of, I mean, 2-1 is the floor for non-con. 3-0, now you really just have to take care of your home games, and you're gonna get there. It's very juicy, there's no doubt. So you can full leverage it if you want to be more aggressive. Even look for like an alternate win total. I'm fine. I mean, it's going to be over or pass for me, but this is a team. Again, I want to see what they do in week 2. I'm probably going to be on them. I'm not overly high on Boise State this year, and I'm just a sucker for Plumlee. I love the way he plays. He's made strides, and he's so fast. If you haven't watched this guy, make some time to watch UCF. The way they play is really fun. A different type of team, obviously in the Bounce Castle at home. Really tough to beat as well. So I'm high on them. And I think they are kind of a dark horse in this conference. Oklahoma State is up next. a team that I really have nothing to say. I don't like this team. Sanders is finally gone. It felt like he's been there for a decade. I have nothing to say about them. I think they're going to be around a middling Big 12 team. Do you see anything different?
No, I agree with you. I think you got a lot of coin flip games here. Seems like books are having trouble pricing them. Are they closer to the top 8 teams in this conference, or are they closer to the bottom? I tend to think they're a little closer to the bottom. They have just so many changing parts here. You have a new DC. He comes over from Gannon University. That's not really that surprising to me. I mean, you've seen Gundy make hires like this in the past. He's okay getting off the board a little bit and not hiring industry guys. QB is a concern for me. Garrett Rangel was awful when he played last year. Alan Bowman hasn't played since 2019. Made a terrible decision transferring to Michigan. I have no idea why he did that. But anyway, he's back in position to start here. We'll see what he can offer. They lose Dominic Richardson at running back. You do have Ollie Gordon and Jaden Nixon back. Those are pretty good recruits, but you kind of bandage over the Richardson loss with Elijah Collins, career underachiever at Michigan State. You lose your top 3 receivers, and you lose a good contributor in Stephen Johnson behind him. I mean, your best returners, Brennan Presley, and then from there, Blaine Green and Jaden Bray. They've been injured a lot in their career. You're going to be reliant on Dazon Stribling from Washington State or Leon Johnson from George Fox, because your other transfer, Arlen Bruce, just got in trouble for gambling. He's one of us, but he's not going to play this year. No. Offensive line, you lose 2 starters. You've got 5 starters returning with experience. This should be a strength. Say that in quotes. They were 87th last year, so I think they do upgrade. How much can they go? Is this a top 50 unit? Probably not. Defense, big concern here. And last year they were so injured, it's tough to actually parse what they would have been had the team actually, been healthy. But they were 65th in run D, 48th in pass rush. Their secondary was a major concern down the stretch last year, largely because of injuries. But now you lose 4 DBs, 1 linebacker, 2 edges, 1 defensive tackle. The edge is really weak. You're highlighted by Watershed, who had 313 snaps. Otherwise, you're relying on Tulsa transfer, Anthony Goodlaw. Don't love that. Defensive tackle's really weak here too. No one above 350 snaps. Reliance on Justin Kirkland, a Utah Tech transfer. Again, Gundy likes to try to find these diamonds in the rough, but I don't like seeing that. Linebacker, transfers. I mean, Justin Wright from Tulsa, Bryce Drummond from North Texas. You lost your best linebacker in the transfer portal, Mason Cobb. DBs, I think this is probably your strength. 2 corners return with 450 snaps. You've got 1 safety back, but I mean, your other projected starters, a JUCO transfer. Really tough for me to get behind this roster. The only thing I'll say is I think this is the easiest schedule in the Big 12. Probably going to bet against them at Arizona State. I like Arizona State. We'll see. I want to see what that line is, but I'm probably going to bet the Sun Devils. But man, in conference, you only play 4 of the top 8 teams. 3 of them are at home. You dodge Texas, you dodge Texas Tech, you dodge TCU and Baylor. Hardest game is Oklahoma. You get it at home. Kansas State home. Kansas home. Gundy is really good at getting to bowls, but man, probably looking at coin flips here. I don't think I'm going to bet this. If I did, I think it would be the over. Just what an easy schedule he drew.
Definitely a good schedule, but yeah, I don't like this team. You mentioned, I'm going to have to go back here. So in that breakdown, you mentioned Gannon University. What the hell is George Fox?
I don't know what George Fox is. That's where Leon Johnson went, though, their transfer. I think it's a D3 school.
Whew. Anyone who's watching, if you went to George Fox, let us know in the comments, please. I need some information there. And then you what was the other? Oh, yeah, Utah Tech.
That's where their projected defensive tackle is going to start.
Okay. Yeah, that I got questions. But George Fox, that's next level. Maybe they'll be good. Maybe they'll gel. You mentioned the schedule is very easy. That's still a no for me. I don't like this team. I think they're going to struggle. I think South Alabama's live to beat them in non-con. South
Alabama's good.
Really good. And even though it's in Stillwater, that's not going to be an easy game. And if you're 1-2 in non-con, good luck. Then I really don't see it. Another team that is not really in the Big 12 is BYU, but they are technically in the Big 12. 80-1 to win the conference. 5.5 wins. they used to be an independent. So they've always been a fascinating schedule. They just play a lot of like random teams out there. Now they kind of have a home. What do you see from this team? Jaron Hall, we just saw him in the preseason. So he is obviously not there anymore.
I like this team. I'm just worried about all the change in year one. We'll talk about a lot of their premier departures, but this team is 20th in the transfer portal. That's pretty good as a bandage. I love their new DC, Jay Hill, Weber State head coach for the last 8 years. Really productive there. I think he's going to maximize what that defense has. And last year they did anything but that. But to get to the roster, I want to hear your opinion if you think this is going to be too much to overcome. I kind of think it is, but I do like some of the additions. Jaron Hall's gone. You bring in Keaton Slovis from Pitt. This is the lowest level of competition he's ever played at, but I keep going back to that freshman year at USC where he was awesome. We'll see what he can do. You do have Jake Retzlaff as well, who's getting a ton of hype out of Provo. He's a JUCO QB, but he's got a lot of mobility, and he reminds me a little more of Jaron Hall. So I'm wondering if at some point they turn to him if Keaton Slovis continues his struggles. Running back, you lose your top two guys, but you go out and add Aiden Robbins from UNLV and Deion Smith for Colorado. You're upgraded there. Receivers tough. You lose Puka Nahua. You also lose Gunnar Romney and Braden Cosper, But because of injuries, Keanu Hill, Chase Roberts, and Cody Epps all played a ton last year. I don't think their ceiling's quite as high, losing a guy like Nahua, but having that experience is good. You add Keelan Marion from UConn, Darius Lassiter from Eastern Michigan as depth. Tight end Isaac Rex is gone. 2 starters come back on the offensive line, but you add former Oklahoma State transfer Caleb Etienne. A lot of transfers here. They've got 7 or 8 on the offensive line, a blend of guys from high-profile programs like Paul Mile from Utah, and then a lot of like JUCO low-level guys who have starting experience. We'll just see if they can actually make the jump. Defense is where I think you see the biggest improvement. You were 108th against the run, 94th in pass rush, 58th in coverage. They were extremely injured, but something needed to change in the defense, and bringing in Jay Hill, I think, is going to be very, very key here. You have 1 starter returning at defensive tackle, but your edges are back. I think that's good here. Linebacker, you got 2 starters here and some pretty good transfers. AJ Vong Fashan from Utah State is here. Harrison Taggart from Oregon. I think their front 7 is going to be good. Their secondary is where I have the most concerns. You have 1 corner returning. They're going to use a ton of transfers. They do have Eddie Heckard coming in from Weber State. Obviously, the familiarity with Jay Hill here. And he's like an All-American from that level of competition. So you hope that the gap isn't quite as maybe wide as some other players. But then Jalen Dunlap from Illinois, he played over there. I think those are probably 2 good additions that you can rely on and hope for an increase in experience in your secondary. Safety, you have both your guys returning. So I do think the secondary is going to be a little better than where they were last year. And then you have so much returning in the defensive line group that I think you probably improve there as well, which is good for BYU. Schedule's weird. You've got a game at Arkansas that's a loss. Within the Big 12, at Texas, you play Oklahoma at home, Texas Tech, TCU, and Kansas, and then some coin flip games on the back end of this schedule. Tough win total for me to bet. If I had to take it, I would look at the over at plus money because I like the roster, and I don't like some of the other teams we'll talk about here coming up. But right now, I think just the coin flip nature of the schedule leaves me desiring a little more in terms of what you get in the odds market. I think I'm just going to pass.
The one thing I'll say that I do like is that I don't think that their win total is determined that early. Like, they're going to be 2-1. I think that's pretty clear. You're going to get a month for these transfers to really get it together. The back end of their schedule is the most important to get to 6. I worry about their offensive line the most. I think they're not going to be able to keep Slovis upright. He is not mobile at all, and he takes a ton of damage back there. They better hope that JUCO is ready to go, because I have a feeling that at some point they might need him. So if it gels, then you keep Slovis upright, or if they have a viable backup, I think they can get to 6. I do. I just worry a little about what exactly does it look like, because they're going to need to beat West Virginia, Iowa State type teams, hold it down against Cincy and then steal one at some point. I think they can do that, but it's going to be ugly early, in my opinion. So I like that staff as well. A lot of guys taking, when you take a coach from Weber State, it's no shock. They've got multiple Weber State transfers, and those guys can really play. Weber State was a good program in the FCS. So I do like it. And I'm not hot now. Okay, I was waiting. I was wondering when the Cyclones were going to grace us in this video. And the answer is right now. Iowa State. Good job. Seen them in the news quite a bit. Why? Well, a lot of their players doing some things that they shouldn't be doing. And now this team is a complete mess. The win total is at 5. It's juiced to the under. Some books have pulled this off the board. Talk to me about Iowa State and all the unknowns with what they're facing right now.
Gambling scandal wasn't
Yes.
pretty before then. This team, 42nd in recruiting, 84th in the transfer portal, 60th in the aggregate. They're not set up to handle anything like this. Terrible depth. You've got a new OC. I mean, he was the run game coordinator last year. Your quarterback is suspended. You don't have a clear backup. Rocco Brecht and J.J. Cole, one of them is going to start. You lose your RB1 in Jarrell Brock. Unrelated to gambling, you lose your wide receiver 1 in Xavier Hutchinson with no clear replacement. Jalen Noel and Demetrius Stanley are fine, but they're role players. The next guy up is Jaden Higgins out of Eastern Kentucky. They didn't play their 4-star freshman last year, Greg Gaines, so I don't know about that. You do return one of your tight ends in Easton Dean, but you lost your backup, Deshaun Hanika. He's suspended. You lost one of your best offensive linemen, Jake Remsburg, suspended. They have 4 dudes with starting experience outside of him, so maybe they can piece it together. You lost one of your best defenders, your premier defensive tackle, suspended. You lost 2 edges outside of that, 3 linebackers, 1 corner, 2 safeties. One of your edges was Will McDonald. And then again, you lost your best interior guy. The defensive line is woefully thin now that Isaiah Lee is suspended. Nobody has more than 230 snaps on the interior. Linebacker is horribly thin. You lost 3 guys there. And the only guy you have back is Gary Vaughn. He's not great. Corners, you have 2. I mean, the secondary should be a strength on paper. They were 58th last year. I still think that's a little ambitious. You still got to replace 1 corner, 1 safety. You don't have any transfers in that area of the field. So you're relying entirely on depth. And again, this team doesn't recruit well. So we don't know these players. They're not high recruits. We'll see if they can assimilate, but I'm not really buying it. Your non-con, you're going to lose to Iowa now. You should probably be like 14-point underdogs, which is crazy against a Hawkeyes team. Only feather in your cap is that game's at home. Ohio's a good MAC team. They're the best MAC team. That game's on the road. They're going to be favored, but I don't think it's going to be as wide as some people think. Within conference, you only dodge Texas Tech and UCF from the top end. You've got Texas, you've got Oklahoma, Kansas State, TCU. I'm firmly betting under this team. I do not think they reach bowl eligibility. 5 gives you push equity, but I think they're more likely a 3 or a 4 win team this year.
So say it every show. Hot take time. Iowa State wins no conference games. I think that Iowa State is not going, again, hot take. They are live to lose every Big 12 game. They don't play Houston and they don't play West Virginia. They get Cincinnati on the road. You better hope you beat Cincinnati, because if you do not, you will be underdog in every other conference game, in my opinion. I think they could legitimately be 2-1 in non-con and then just finish 2-10.
I don't think books are the books that have this up. I don't think they're adjusting quickly enough to the departures of this team. And I did not think this team was good to begin with.
No, where are their just looking at conference seriously though? Like even taking not hot takes out of it, what are they favored in 1 game?
I mean, you're on the road at Provo, and I like BYU more than this roster. That's close to a pick, I might imagine. You're at Cincinnati. I think you're favored there.
Yeah.
Maybe Oklahoma State early in the year, but I think you're an underdog. I agree with you.
And it gets worse from there. Everywhere else, you're a definite dog. Like this team, we're going to be recapping at the end of the show our favorite bets, and I guarantee you I'll be mentioning this again. I'll just leave it at that. I don't think this is going to go good for the fighting Jamal Tinsleys here, but we move on we got a couple teams left. Cincinnati's one of them, another newcomer to the Big 12, 100-1 to win the conference, 5.5 wins, really juiced to the under. They had their run as well, but that's quite a while. Ritter, of course, is long gone. What remains for Cincinnati? Are they a reasonable team to get to a bowl?
They got absolutely raided by Luke Fickell as he left.
Yes.
They bring in Satterfield at head coach. I do not like him. 24-25 with Louisville. Somehow gets this job. Brings in Brad Glenn as his OC, the Virginia Tech pass game coordinator. I don't know what credentials he put on the field last year to deserve this job. Brings in his buddy Brian Brown as DC from Louisville. You add Emory Jones at quarterback. That was the weakness of the Cincinnati team last year with Ben Bryant. So maybe that's an upgrade. Jones can at least run. You lose Charles McClellan, but you return 3 of your top 4 rushers. I think that's fine for the Cincinnati team. We'll get to some other areas where they're very weak. One of them is wide receiver. They don't have like any catches back. I think one player has 4 catches and that's it, but you're highlighted by the departures of Tyler Scott and Trey Tucker. That's atrocious. You'll heavily be leaning on the transfer portal with Donovan Ollie from Washington State, D. Wiggins from Louisville. He never produced there. Aaron Turner from UConn, Sterling Burkhalter from North Carolina A&T, Xavier Henderson from Florida, Braden Smith from Louisville. They're certainly downgraded there. Lose your top 2 tight ends, Josh Wiley, Leonard Taylor. Lose 4 starters on the offensive line. That's an area where Fickle really, really hammered you. Projected starters, I mean, like, you're going to be relying on some really low-level transfers. Philip Wilder from Southeast Missouri State. Trevor Radisevich from Penn. This unit was 72nd last year. They're going to be worse. And I think that trickles to the run game and the quarterback room, where both of them are probably going to suffer. Since he had a pretty good defense last year, 13th in run D, 4th in pass rush, 63rd in coverage. You lose both your edges, 4 linebackers, 2 corners, and 1 safety. And losing Potter and Pace on the edge is huge. Those are 2 really good players. The only thing that really works in your favor here is you do have 2 awesome defensive tackles. Joanne Briggs and Dante Corleone are names to know. But can that really mask everything you're losing on the edge? I'm not sure. Linebacker, complete transfer portal. No idea if this gels. And then at corner, you have 2 guys that played over 300 snaps last year. Jordan Young comes in from Florida State, but 1 safety back. I think the secondary is going to be a weakness for this team too. Schedule-wise, it's kind of easy, but Cincinnati is very bad. So I'm like trying to middle this to some degree. I think you lose to Pitt in non-con. You probably beat Miami, Ohio, East Kentucky, but Oklahoma, Baylor, Kansas, UCF, I think they're all losses. And then during the midpoint of the schedule, the other middling teams where you're looking at coin flip-ish games, I would just rather play the other rosters than take a stab on Cincinnati. So the under, I think, even with the juice, is still a pretty good bet here. And it's one that I've taken.
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to fault you on that. I like the under that we just talked about more than this, but they can coexist. Certainly, you are laying a lot of juice here, but I think it's worthwhile to explore. A lot of transfers. I don't really see it, though. Even with a favorable schedule, I think it's a pretty rough welcome to the Big 12 for Cincinnati. West Virginia's been in the Big 12, but they've fallen on pretty hard times. Over 4.5 wins. It is juiced to the over, but it wasn't that long ago that going to West Virginia was a serious test for any team, and that is just simply not the case. I guess they're in a better situation than the basketball team. We're not going to get into that right now, but man, what is there to say here? How, minus 140 to get to 5, but how much likely are they to go bowling or do anything of note this year?
I like this team more than some of the other teams. Unfortunately, they don't play Iowa State, so we can't pick them off head-to-head there. But they play Cincinnati, and I think they're a better team, certainly, than them. So that's is kind of a leverage spot on the schedule here. But they're moving on from JT Daniels to Garrett Green. I actually think this could be a sneaky upgrade for this team. JT Daniels just did not fit the mold of their offense. They're changing OCs, moving away from this air raid, which suits their team. They should be a ground and pound team, and having a guy like Garrett Green, whose best trait is his mobility, should be a better fit here. At running back, CJ Donaldson's back. You got Justin Johnson, Jalen Anderson back. Good run game. You lose a ton at receiver. Sam James, Bryce Ford Wheaton, Caden Prather, and Reese Smith. They portaled their way to some certain pretty decent players here, like Devin Carter from NC State, Jay Sean Polk from Kent State, EJ Horton from Marshall. They actually have 2 4-star receivers, freshmen coming in, which surprised me. And you had Cole Taylor at LSU. I'm not really too worried about receiver. They're changing offenses, so I don't think this is going to be as big of a part here. The big key, I think, is can they get this offensive line intact? And injuries allowed 6 players to start last year, get considerable experience. They lose 1 starter, but having those 6 guys back should be awesome, assuming they're healthy. Again, the reason the 6 guys played was injury. So 34th last year on the offensive line. If they had good health, I think they take a step forward, and that just works right into how this team wants to play. They're going to be a ground and pound, slow team. It's going to create a lot of volatility, but there's a lot of weak run defenses in this conference that they could potentially exploit. Defense, you were 40th in run D, 92nd in pass rush, 125th in coverage. We'll get to that coverage unit. You lose 2 defensive tackles, 2 edges, 1 linebacker, 2 corners, and 1 safety. They were really hurt on defense last year. So on the edge, you actually return 2 guys with pretty good experience. The biggest mess is defensive tackle. They're going to really have to rely on some transfers here. Biggest returners, Mike Lockhart, only 269 snaps. Fortunately, you add like Fortorma Mulba from Penn State, a name I don't want to try to pronounce, from Kentucky. This will be butchered, but like you get some guys from pretty good programs here. So can you be a little better? Linebacker, you have 1 guy here. I think that maybe hurts your run D. Corner, I think, is actually maybe upgraded. You only have 1 full-time starter back, but you go to the portal and you add some pretty good guys. Like Beanie Bishop started for Minnesota, Montre Miller from Kent State, Keyshawn Cobb for Buffalo. A lot of names here. And with all the injuries last year, all you have to do is be better than 125th. I think you probably are just through variance better than that. Safety, you got 2 starters back, and you add Anthony Wilson from Georgia Southern. Better unit in the secondary. Think they're top 100. How high they can climb, I'm not sure. All this to say, I think the defense for West Virginia is a little bit better, and they're finally playing to their strengths on offense. So can this team be slightly better? I think they can. Penn State's a loss in non-con. Duquesne should be a win. Pitt's a tricky game. They'll be underdogs, but as you know, that backyard brawl, weird things happen. Within the conference, they dodged Texas, Kansas State, and Kansas. It's not the hardest schedule, but there's a lot of coin flip games. What I think I'm going to do is play West Virginia against these other teams I'm shorting in the conference, like Cincinnati, just on a week-to-week basis. What do you think about West Virginia?
Yeah, I'm basically in the same camp as you. I would lean, I think of the teams that are down here, I would go over on them before I would go over on Cincinnati, Iowa State, or even Houston, who we'll talk about in a second. I just don't know if I really need to do that because you mentioned there are actionable spots that will determine the win total. You know, they're not going to beat Penn State. They're not going to beat some of these top tiers. They're going to beat Duquesne and whoever else, that are the gimmies, and we'll see. So I'm not looking to lay minus 140 over 4.5, but if I had to pick, that is where I'd go. Last team here, and then we're going to give our best bets recap and bounce on out of here, turn the page to week 0. Houston, one of the more frustrating teams for me last year, and they are not expected to be good this year. What remains for this team? Obviously, it's a lot of changes, a lot of losses, over 4.5 wins. There's no true dumpster diver team in this conference, but if there is one, this could be it.
I think they're probably a little better than people give them credit for, but it's going to be a tough road. You make the jump from AAC to Big 12. New OC, I think I don't even know if he's going to call the plays yet. He was the Tulane offensive line coach last year. Iman Nagave, I think is how you say his name. A lot of change, though. Clayton Toon's gone. Fortunately, you add Donovan Smith, former Texas Tech signal caller. I believe he's a hometown kid, but he's a pretty good portal addition. You lose Tazon Henry and Alton McCaskill in your backfield, but you do have Stacy Sneed, Brandon Campbell back. Tony Mathis comes in from West Virginia. Receiver is going to be tough to replace some of these guys. Tank Dell is gone. That's a huge loss. Keyshawn Carter also left. You do return former 4-star Matthew Golden. Contributors Samuel Brown and Joseph Manjack are back. Some pretty good transfers coming in. Joshua Cobbs from Wyoming. Stephon Johnson from Oklahoma State. Plus you have 2 4-star receivers in Michael Harrison Pilot and Jonah Williams. I think the receiving corps could be pretty good. I don't think you'll reach the same heights as you did with Dell, but I don't hate this receiving corps at all. Michael Laughlin comes in from West Virginia at tight end. Offensive line has 3 full-time starters. However, you have a couple like weird depth pieces that started in previous years. Tank Jenkins started in 2021. Ruben Onije started in 2020. That gives you 5 guys with some starting experience. Then they hammered the portal. Jalen Garth from Texas. You have an FIU starter. Max Baines transferred to Akron for a year. He was previously with Houston. Now he's back with the program. It's a weird blend of production from low-level schools versus guys that have previously played. I think the offensive line's actually okay. The biggest concern here is the defense, and holy smokes, this front 7 just got absolutely demolished. According to efficiency metrics, this was the #1 pass rush in the country last year, and holy smokes, this team just gutted. We could go through each of these players, but oh my goodness, it is tough. Derek Parrish, Atlas Bell, D'Anthony Jones. I mean, on the defensive interior, Jermichael Neal, Manny Nunnery at linebacker. You lose good DBs like Javarius Owens was a really highly rated DB last year. This defense is absolutely gutted. They do add a ton of transfers. I have no way of knowing if they can reach the same heights. I don't think it's anywhere near possible. Maybe you could get better in coverage. That was your weakest link, 73rd. Got 2 starters back, a lot of transfers, but man, biggest concern by far is the defense. You do dodge Oklahoma, TCU, and Kansas, but Texas Tech, K-State, Baylor, UCF, I think they all have a field day against you. Yeah, man, it's going to be really tough for Houston out here. Rice is a team that's going to be better on offense with JT Daniels there. Tough sliding for Houston. I think you got a lot of coin flip games. Probably can just bet some overs here. I don't love the win total with how many games come down to single-digit spreads.
Tough spot. Yeah, I mean, it gets tough right off the bat. They got a coin flip game against UTSA in the first week. It's a 1-point spread, just to give you some context. That's what you're going to be dealing with all year with Houston. Defense takes a step back. I think there are better spots there, but we have just gone through 14 teams. No doubt about it, but we're not done yet. Full Big 12 breakdown is in the books here at Betting You. But if you have a couple teams, if you've got a couple wagers, if you have a couple bets you want to make for the Big 12 conference this year, what are your favorite win totals? Some of your favorite spots to attack for the people out there?
I made 4 in this conference. My number 1 would be Kansas over 6 wins. Favorable schedule. I think they're favored in 6 games, and then you just got to knock off one of your teams you're maybe an underdog in, and I'm not sure you're going to be an underdog in all of those. Of the top 6 teams on their schedule, they draw 5 of those games at home. So I'll take Kansas over 6 at minus 125. My favorite long shot is UCF at 35-1 to win the Big 12. I think this is a quality roster with a lot of production returning. It's a long shot for a reason. They're ranked 7th in this conference according to the odds, but their roster, I think, is closer to teams like Kansas State than a lot of people are willing to admit. 2 unders, Iowa State. Gambling scandal has this roster in shambles. There's not really much else to say. They'll be clear underdogs in almost every conference game this year. And then Cincinnati, under 5.5. Do not like the new coaching staff. And their team has just as many changes as Iowa State. Not because of anything gambling related, but just because Luke Fickell rated them in the portal.
It's hard to push back on any of those. Certainly the under with Iowa State might be my favorite bet for the entire conference. 2 quick things for me. One, as always, I just want to remind people, you're getting ready for the season. All the content we have here at OddsShopper, the links are below. Look what we have. Take advantage. Get in our Discord. Sign up for new books. Get those bonus offers that are available. Again, it takes 30 seconds to look, another 30 seconds to sign up, and it really can make the difference for your season. I'll give you one more on the way out, all the way back. I think that Texas is going to get to 10 wins. You can get over 9.5 out there. I think they're a dangerous team this year. Even if they drop the game to Bama, I think they're going to be just fine. So we have gone through a ton here. Again, stay tuned for even more content each and every week. Next week, sir, when you get back, week 0, best bets, me, Matt Gajeski, and the entire OddsShopper family ready to rock. If you have any questions, follow Matt at Matt_Gajeski, me at JazzRazDFS. Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. Good luck and joy. And we'll talk to you guys next week.